Let me tell you something most people never find out until it's too late. There is one thing you can do to the person who loves you most that no apology can fully erase. Not a fight, not a lie, not even betrayal in the way you're probably thinking right now. Something much quieter than that. Something that happens in a single second. In front of other people. With a smile on your face. I did that thing to my husband. And for a long time I told myself he was fine, that he'd forgotten about it, that we were okay. But every single night when I'd look at him across the dinner table, I knew the truth. His eyes had changed, and no matter what I did, I could not figure out how to get back whatever it was I had taken from him that night. This is that story. And I need you to stay with me until the end. Because what happened between me and my husband isn't just our story. It's probably happening in your home right now, and you might not even see it. His name was Caleb. I met him at the worst possible time in my life. I had just gone through a brutal falling out with a close friend. I had moved to a new city, and I was working a job I hated just to pay rent. I was not looking for love. I was barely keeping myself together. But Caleb had this strange ability to just appear at the right moment. We met at a bookstore of all places. He was reaching for the same book I was. We both pulled it at the same time, and when we looked at each other, he said, completely serious, "I clearly need this more than you. I'm having a terrible week." And I laughed. I actually laughed for the first time in what felt like months. We talked in that bookstore for 2 hours. We split the book. He took the first half, I took the second. We made a plan to swap. That was the excuse to see each other again. And 3 years later, that little torn paperback was sitting on the shelf in the home we shared together. Caleb was the kind of man who remembered small things. Not birthdays and anniversaries, though he remembered those too. The small things. Like how I always needed a glass of water on my nightstand before I slept. How I hated driving in rain but never admitted it. How I laughed louder than I meant to when I was nervous. He paid attention. In a world full of people who are always half distracted, this man was fully present whenever he looked at me. We got married quietly. Just family and a few close friends. Nothing big, nothing fancy. And it was perfect. The first few years were easy in the way that early love is easy. But then, and this is the part I need you to really listen to, Caleb had a dream. He had always wanted to build something of his own, a landscaping and outdoor design company. He had a gift for it, he genuinely did. He could look at a bare, ugly patch of land and see something beautiful in it. He used to say, everything just needs the right hands and enough time. He left his stable job to start this company, and I supported it. I really did at first. But months went by, and then more months, and the business was slow to grow. Jobs were small, money was tight, and I started to feel this weight creeping into our life that I didn't know how to carry, and instead of carrying it with him, I quietly started blaming him for it. Here's what I didn't understand then, that I understand completely now. Caleb already knew things were hard. He didn't need me to remind him. He was already fighting a war inside his own head every single day. A war between believing in himself and being terrified that he had made a mistake, that he was letting me down, that he wasn't enough. And instead of being the person who quieted that war, I became the person who made it louder. The comments started small. Maybe this isn't the right time for this, babe. Or some people are just better at working for someone else. There's no shame in that. On the surface, they sounded almost reasonable, almost like concern. But underneath them was something uglier. Impatience. And a growing unkind belief that maybe Caleb wasn't capable of the thing he was trying to do. I've asked myself so many times since then how I got there. How I went from the woman who laughed with him for 2 hours in a bookstore to the woman who picked at him in quiet, sharp little ways. And I think the honest answer is this. I was scared. I was scared about money and our future, and I didn't know how to say that out loud. So instead of being vulnerable with the person I loved, I turned my fear into criticism and aimed it at him, which is the most cowardly thing I have ever done in my life. But all of that, as bad as it was, wasn't the moment that broke something between us. The real moment happened on a Friday evening in March. We were invited to a dinner party at the home of a couple named Priya and Owen. Owen worked in the same world as Caleb. He had his own outdoor and landscape business, but his was doing extremely well. The kind of well that you can see in every corner of a home. Big house. Beautiful furniture. The dinner was catered. I remember feeling a specific, ugly feeling walking through their front door that I am not proud of. Not happiness for them. Envy. And I carried that envy around with me the whole night like a stone in my pocket. Caleb was quiet that evening. I could see him taking everything in. Not in a bitter way, in a wistful way. Like a man looking at a version of his future he wasn't sure he'd ever reach. And then it happened. Owen raised his glass near the end of the night to make a little speech. He talked about the grind of building something from the ground up, about the doubt you feel, about the nights where you wonder if you made a mistake. And then he looked at Caleb, genuinely, warmly, and he said, "Honestly, man, I have a lot of respect for where you are right now. It takes guts. Your wife must be your biggest supporter through all of it." The table turned to me. And I don't know exactly what happened in that moment. Maybe it was the wine. Maybe it was the envy I'd been sitting with all night. Maybe it was every small, ugly feeling I'd been storing up for months finally finding a way out. But I smiled. And in that smile was an entire story. And then I said, "Support him? I'm just waiting to see if this whole thing actually becomes something." 2 seconds of silence. Then a polite laugh. Then someone changed the subject. The dinner moved on. But Caleb did not move on. I saw it the moment the words left my mouth. I looked at him and his face was completely still. Not angry, not embarrassed. Just still. Like something had turned off behind his eyes. Like a light had gone out very quietly in a room and suddenly everything was slightly darker. We drove home without saying a single word, and I told myself it was fine. I told myself I'd apologize in the morning. I told myself he knew I was joking. I told myself 100 different comfortable lies because the truth was too difficult to look at directly. The morning came. He was already up when I walked into the kitchen. He handed me my coffee. He smiled. He asked if I slept okay. And that smile stopped me cold. Because it didn't reach his eyes. It was just a shape his mouth was making. His eyes were somewhere far away, somewhere I had never seen in him before. And that's the moment I can't stop replaying. Not the dinner, not what I said, but that next morning, the coffee in my hand, that careful, polite, empty smile. Because that's when I knew something had actually broken. Not cracked. Broken. Weeks passed. Caleb kept working, but he stopped sharing things with me. For every small win from the business, every new inquiry, every good conversation with a potential client, he used to call me midday just to share it. Excited and breathless and talking fast. But that stopped. Now he'd just come home and say it was fine, and that was it. He had learned to protect his joy from me. And the worst part? I understood why. I tried things to get back to where we were. A weekend trip I planned as a surprise. His favorite meals showing up on the table for no reason. More affection. More effort. He received all of it kindly, gratefully even. But kindly in the way you treat someone you're being careful around, not in the way you treat the person who is your safe place. There was one night, maybe 2 months after the dinner, where I woke up at 2 a.m. and he wasn't in bed. I found him sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open and a cold cup of coffee next to him, just staring at a spreadsheet. And he didn't hear me come in, so I stood there for a moment and I watched him. This man I had chosen. This man who was trying so hard in the silence of 2 a.m., alone, carrying all of it alone. And I thought, I did this. I made him feel like he had to carry this alone. I made him feel like he couldn't share it with me. I made him feel small in front of people who were watching, and now he was protecting himself. I went back to bed and I cried into my pillow for a long time. The next day, I asked him if we could really talk. He looked at me for a moment like he was deciding something. Then he said, yes. We sat on the couch, and I didn't come with a prepared speech. I came with the truth, all of it. The fear I had been carrying and misdirecting at him, the envy I felt at that dinner, the specific cruelty of what I had said, and the exact moment I had watched something in him change. I told him I knew I had broken something, and I told him I was sorry in a way that I had never said those words before. Not the quick, surface sorry, the kind that costs you something. He listened without saying a word. And when I was done, he leaned back and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. And then he said something I will carry with me for the rest of my life. He said, Sophia, the business failing would have been something I could recover from, but you not believing in me, in front of other people, that one I'm still trying to find my way back from. Sophia. He used my name. He almost never used my name. And in that moment it hit me like cold water exactly how serious this was. We talked for 4 hours that afternoon. He told me things he had never said out loud. About how terrified he was of failing. About how some nights the doubt was so loud he couldn't sleep. About how he had been holding on to the memory of who I used to be to him, the woman from the bookstore, the woman who believed in him before he believed in himself. And how that night at the dinner had made him wonder if that woman was still there. She was still there. I had just buried her under a mountain of fear and selfishness, but she was still there. It didn't fix overnight. I want to be honest about that because I think the dishonest version of this story would be to say we hugged and cried and everything went back to normal. It didn't. There were still quiet evenings. Still moments where the old ease between us felt just slightly out of reach. Still times where I'd catch him and he'd be somewhere inside himself that I couldn't access, but we kept choosing each other. Every day. Even on the days where it was hard and clunky and uncomfortable. We kept showing up. And then, 7 months later, on a random Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. It was Caleb. And before I could even say hello, he said, "Babe, you are not going to believe this." His voice was shaking. The good kind of shaking. He had just landed a contract, the biggest one his company had ever gotten, a full commercial development project. The kind that doesn't just pay the bills. The kind that changes everything. I stood in the middle of my kitchen and I pressed the phone to my ear and I cried. Not sad crying, the other kind. The kind that comes up from somewhere deep when something you were so afraid of losing turns out to still be there. He came home that evening, and he walked through the door, and his eyes were bright. Actually bright, the way they used to be. And he looked at me and he grinned that ridiculous, full, unguarded grin that I hadn't seen in so long. And he picked me up right there in the doorway, and we just stayed like that for a long moment. Later that night, we opened a bottle of wine we'd been saving for something worth celebrating. And we sat across from each other at that same kitchen table where I had watched him alone at 2 a.m. And we talked and laughed, and it felt, for the first time in a very long time, like us again. But here is the part I need you to hear before this ends. That night wasn't just a celebration of a contract. It was the night I fully understood what I had almost thrown away. Not the marriage in the legal sense, not the house or the life we had built. I had almost thrown away his trust in me as his person. The one person on earth a man opens the most hidden and vulnerable parts of himself to. The one person he let see his fear. And I had taken that openness and used it against him in front of other people because I was scared and selfish. The business could have failed and we would have survived it. But you cannot build a life with someone who makes you feel like you are failing even when you are trying your hardest. You cannot stay soft and open with someone who uses your softness against you. And you cannot keep giving your best to someone who publicly questions whether your best is good enough. Caleb forgave me. Not because I deserved it quickly, but because we had something real, and real things, when you fight for them honestly, have a way of coming back. On our anniversary that year, he gave me a card, and inside it, in his handwriting, was one line. It said, "I'm glad you're still the woman from the bookstore." I have read that line so many times the paper has gone soft. Look at the person you love tonight, not at their phone, not at the TV, at them. And ask yourself, when is the last time you made them feel like you are on their side? When is the last time you chose to build them up instead of quietly picking them apart? Because they are paying attention, even when they don't say anything. Especially when they don't say anything. And the eyes always, always tell the truth. If something in this story hit close to home, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more stories like this, the real kind, the kind that make you feel something, subscribe and come back. I will be here. Sonnet 4.6 Extended.